The sound of screeching tires tore through the night air. Isla gasped as the black sedan skidded across the rain-slick street, headlights flashing wildly like a predator's eyes. "Move!" A deep, commanding voice cut through the chaos. A hand, large, warm, and undeniably firm, clamped around her wrist, yanking her backward just as the car slammed into a lamppost where she had been standing. The pole cracked with a thunderous metallic scream, sparks raining down like angry fireflies. Isla stumbled into the stranger's chest, the scent of him flooding her senses, clean linen, cedar wood, and something darker, like the sharp edge of winter. Her heart hammered. Her breath came in quick bursts. She tilted her head up, and her gaze met eyes the color of a storm-tossed ocean. Lucas Vance. She knew him instantly. The elusive billionaire whose face graced business magazines but who avoided cameras like a shadow. The man rumored to own half the city's skyline. And now, the man who had just saved her life. "You could have been killed," he growled, his voice low, clipped, yet oddly protective. His grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't let go. "Do you have a death wish?" She opened her mouth to speak, but her words tangled somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. I was just crossing the street. In the middle of a storm? With your head in the clouds?" His gaze swept over her, lingering for just a moment too long. Not in desire, at least not yet, but in assessment, as if cataloging every detail of the drenched woman standing before him. Behind them, the driver of the sedan stumbled out, cursing, but Lucas didn't even glance his way. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a sleek black card, and pressed it into her palm. "You're coming with me." Her breath hitched. "What?" "Your clothes are soaked. You're shaking." His voice softened, barely, but his eyes stayed hard. "And I don't leave loose ends." Loose ends? The words lodged in her chest like a puzzle piece she didn't yet understand. Before she could protest, he draped his long, tailored coat over her shoulders and guided her toward a waiting car. A different one this time, black and gleaming, the kind that whispered of power and money. The door closed behind her with a heavy click. She sat there, dripping and bewildered, as the city lights blurred outside the tinted windows. Isla didn't know it yet, but tonight wasn't just the night she narrowly escaped death. It was the night she stepped into Lucas Vance's world, a world where feelings were forbidden, deals were binding, and every promise came with a price. And the price for this one would be her heart.
Hello, family. Welcome to another episode of Ever After Romance. If you're hooked, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe now. You don't want to miss the next romantic story.
Chapter 1. The car purred through the rain-slick streets, a cocoon of warmth and leather-scented air against the storm raging outside. Isla clutched the coat tighter around her, its weight heavy and alien on her shoulders. Lucas sat beside her, one elbow resting on the door, his jaw a sharp line of quiet authority. His gaze was fixed out the window, but she could feel the force of his presence like an invisible current, steady, controlled, and impossible to ignore. She cleared her throat. "You didn't have to." "I did." The words cut through her sentence, final and immovable. Her fingers tightened around the lapel of his coat. "I don't understand. You don't even know me." At that, he turned his head. In the dim glow of the dashboard, his eyes searched hers, not in curiosity but in calculation. "You're right, I don't. But I make it my business to recognize potential and danger." The air between them thickened, not with fear but with something unspoken. The car slowed, pulling into a private underground garage. Sleek black columns, polished floors, and the faint echo of water dripping somewhere distant surrounded them. The driver stepped out to open her door, but Lucas was already there, his hand extended. She hesitated. The warmth of his palm from earlier still lingered in her memory, and accepting it now felt like stepping onto a path she couldn't step back from. Still, she placed her hand in his, her small fingers swallowed by his strong grip. Inside, the elevator's mirrored walls reflected an image she barely recognized, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her sweater clinging to her like a second skin, her eyes wide and searching. And next to her, Lucas, dry, immaculate, and composed, as if the storm outside didn't dare touch him. When the doors opened, she was met with a view that stole her breath. His penthouse stretched out in a sweep of glass and steel, the city skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. This way. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of command. She followed him past sleek furniture and quiet art until they reached a living room with a fire flickering in the hearth. The warmth licked at her chilled skin, making her realize just how cold she'd been. He motioned to the sofa. "Sit, I'll get you something warm to drink." She blinked. "You make tea?" A faint shadow of a smirk curved his lips, there and gone again in an instant. "I have people for that, but I can if necessary." When he returned with a steaming mug, she noticed something she hadn't before: hesitation, a faint flicker of thought behind his eyes. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Because I think you might be exactly what I've been looking for." Her pulse stuttered. "And what is that?" His lips curved, but not in a smile. An heir, Chapter 2. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. An heir. Isla stared at him, fingers tightening around the mug. "That's a strange thing to say to someone you just met." Lucas didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, the flicker of the fire catching on the edges of his tailored suit. "I don't believe in wasting time. You don't seem the type to appreciate small talk." Her pulse skittered. "You're right. But what exactly are you suggesting?" He studied her in silence like a chess master reading the board before making his move. "I need a child, an heir to my name, my company, my legacy. I've spent years avoiding entanglements, but my board is insistent. They want stability. A family man." Isla blinked. "So you want me to—" She couldn't even say the words. "I want you to carry my child," he said smoothly. "Nothing more." Her chest tightened. "Nothing more? Just a business arrangement?" "Precisely." His tone was even, but his eyes held an intensity that made her throat dry. "You'd be compensated, generously. You'd be cared for. No obligations after the child is born." The logical part of her wanted to laugh it off, to call it absurd. But something in his voice, steady, almost vulnerable beneath the steel, kept her rooted in place. "Why me?" she asked finally. He didn't look away. "Because tonight proved you're not like the women I'm used to. You don't want my name or my money, you want something real, which means you can walk away when the time comes." Her heart gave an odd twist. He made it sound so simple, but nothing about this felt simple. "And what if I can't walk away?" For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. "Then that would be unexpected." Silence settled between them, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire. She sipped her tea to avoid his gaze, but her mind raced. She thought about her quiet life at the library, the bills piling on her kitchen counter, the fear of losing the only home she'd ever known. This man was dangerous, not in the way of violence, but in the way of temptation. Finally, she set the mug down. "If I agree, there will be rules, my rules." One corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest smirk. "Good. I prefer clear terms." She leaned forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Rule 1, no feelings." The smirk deepened, though his voice stayed low. "That might be harder than you think." A shiver rippled down her spine, but she forced her expression to stay cool. "Rule 2, this ends the moment the baby is born." He rose, walking toward her with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who always got what he wanted. "Agreed," he murmured. But his eyes told a different story, one that whispered he was already imagining breaking both rules. Chapter 3. The conference room was nothing like the cozy firelit study from the night before. Cold glass walls, polished steel table, a skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city felt distant, unreachable, as though they were standing in a world that belonged entirely to him. Isla sat at one end, her hands clasped in her lap. At the other, Lucas stood beside a sleek folder, his posture commanding without effort. "Read it carefully," he said, sliding the papers toward her. "Every clause, every line, is designed to protect both of us." She tried to focus on the words in front of her, but her eyes kept drifting to his hands. Long fingers, steady as they tapped the table, the kind of hands that looked like they could dismantle anything. Business rivals, defenses, maybe even her resolve. "The payment," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "is generous." "It's fair," he corrected. "You'll live here during the pregnancy. I won't risk your health, or the child's." She glanced up sharply. "Live here? With you?" He leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow lifting. "Unless you prefer to be on your own when the morning sickness hits or when you need someone to carry you to bed after fainting. Which, by the way, you did last night." Her cheeks heated. "That was because of the storm." "Was it?" he asked, voice low enough to make her breath catch. She looked back at the contract, forcing her attention to the black and white words. No emotional involvement, no claims on each other's personal lives. Termination of agreement once the child was born. It was exactly what she'd asked for. And yet, the longer she sat across from him, the more her chest felt tight, like she was signing away more than she understood. "Do you always make life decisions with strangers?" she asked, trying to keep the mood light. "I've never met anyone I trusted this quickly," he said without missing a beat. She blinked. "Trust? You barely know me." He leaned forward, his gaze locking on hers. "I know enough. You're not here to trap me. You're here because you need this as much as I do." The truth of it stung. She hated that he was right. Her pen hovered over the signature line. Her heart hammered. Once she signed, there would be no turning back. She exhaled slowly, the sound almost shaky. "Fine. But remember, no feelings." He smiled faintly, though there was a glint in his eyes she couldn't read. "Of course." The moment her pen touched the paper, a strange energy passed between them. Not relief, not triumph. Something hotter, more dangerous. He reached out, taking the signed contract. His fingers brushed hers, barely a second, but enough to send a spark racing up her arm. "Welcome to the arrangement," he said softly. "Let's see how long we can keep those rules intact." Chapter 4. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the kind of home Isla had only ever seen in magazines. Warm amber light spilled across glossy marble floors. Walls of glass looked out over the city. So high up the streets below seemed like another world. Plush cream furniture curved around a sleek black fireplace, and beyond that, a balcony kissed by drifting clouds. "This is bigger than the library I work at," she murmured, stepping inside. Lucas followed, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his presence somehow making the vast space feel smaller. "You'll get used to it." She doubted she would. Everything gleamed here, every surface immaculate, every scent faintly masculine. It wasn't just a home. It was a statement. "Your room's this way." He led her down a hallway lined with tall doors, the sound of their footsteps echoing. When he opened the door to her suite, she froze. Soft gray walls, a king-sized bed with silver sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. A vase of fresh white lilies sat on the nightstand, their fragrance light and sweet. "You had this ready?" she asked, surprised. His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered. "I don't like unprepared situations." Her gaze wandered to the adjoining bathroom, marble counters, a deep, soaking tub. It felt too perfect, too intimate for what was supposed to be a practical arrangement. She set her suitcase on the bed, then realized he was still standing in the doorway watching her. Do you, need something? She asked. He didn't move. Just making sure you're comfortable. She swallowed, acutely aware of how close they were. The air between them seemed to hum. I will be, once you stop hovering. That earned her the faintest smirk. He stepped inside, his hand brushing the doorframe. I'm not hovering. I'm assessing. Her pulse skipped. Assessing what? His gaze traveled over her face, lingering in a way that made her knees unsteady. Whether this was a mistake. The word stung, but his tone was soft, almost conflicted. And? She asked quietly. He took a slow breath, then turned toward the door. I'll let you know. She watched him leave, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. For a long moment, she just stood there, heart racing. The rules they'd agreed on echoed in her head. No feelings, no strings, no crossing the line. But when she went to unpack, she found a folded blanket at the foot of the bed. Not just any blanket, a knitted one, in the exact shade of blue she'd once mentioned liking at the cafe where they'd first met. She hadn't told him that color meant safety to her. And yet, he had noticed. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, quiet but undeniable. Chapter 5. The rain came first, soft at first, then fierce, rattling the windows of the penthouse in the dead of night. Isla tossed under the silver sheets, her mind restless. The city lights winked through the glass like they were keeping secrets. Hunger tugged at her. But it was more than that. It was the heaviness of sharing a home with a man she barely knew, yet couldn't stop thinking about. She slipped out of bed, pulling a cardigan over her nightdress. Her bare feet whispered against the marble floor as she padded toward the kitchen. The light was already on. Lucas stood at the counter, sleeves rolled to his forearms, pouring steaming water into a cup. The faint scent of peppermint drifted toward her. I didn't think billionaires made their own tea, she said softly, leaning on the doorway. He glanced up, a shadow of amusement in his dark eyes. And I didn't think librarians wandered kitchens at midnight. Her lips curved despite herself. Guess we're both full of surprises. She crossed the room, the sound of rain filling the space between them. He slid a cup toward her without asking, steam curling like whispered temptation. The tea warmed her hands, but it was his nearness that made her pulse flutter. His voice was low when he said, You couldn't sleep? She shook her head. Too quiet, and too loud at the same time. He tilted his head. Loud? Her eyes flicked to the storm outside. My thoughts. Something softened in his expression, and for a moment, the cold billionaire facade cracked. I know the feeling. They stood in silence, sipping tea, watching lightning flash in the distance. Then she felt his gaze, heavy, intent. Her breath caught. What? You're different, he murmured, as if the words slipped out before he could stop them. She set her cup down. Different how? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, the faint heat of him brushing her skin. You don't treat me like him. Him? She asked, confused. The man everyone thinks I am. His voice was raw, almost unguarded. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. Before she could speak, thunder rolled, the lights flickered, and she startled. His hand shot out, steadying her by the waist. The touch was brief but searing. You're jumpy, he said, his mouth curving, but his thumb lingered a fraction longer than it should have before he pulled away. Her cheeks burned. And you hover, she countered, echoing her earlier words. This time, his smirk was deliberate. Maybe I do. The storm outside deepened, but inside, the air between them felt warmer and far more dangerous. And as she walked back to her room, she realized the sound of rain was no longer what kept her awake. It was the memory of his hand at her waist. Chapter 6. The smell of rain still clung to the air the next morning. Isla sat at the dining table nibbling toast, one hand absently resting on her small but noticeable bump. The quiet hum of the city felt almost peaceful, until it wasn't. A sharp twist gripped her lower belly. She froze, the toast slipping from her fingers. Another pang followed, sharper this time, stealing her breath. Her mind raced. She was only halfway through the pregnancy. This couldn't be normal. She pushed back her chair, calling for Marlene, the housekeeper. Her voice cracked. Something's wrong. Isla? Lucas's voice cut in, firm but laced with alarm. He strode in, his phone in one hand, suit jacket slung over his shoulder. The sight of her clutching her stomach made his eyes darken instantly. What happened? His tone left no room for evasions. I don't know, she stammered, trying to breathe through the ache. It just started. The phone was already at his ear. Get the car, now. His voice was ice, but his hands were warm and steady as they wrapped around her shoulders. I can walk, she whispered. I'm not risking it, he said sharply, then softened. Just lean on me. The elevator ride was a blur, his arm firm around her, his scent grounding her in a way she didn't expect. Outside, the storm had cleared, but the air still felt heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. In the car, she felt another cramp. Her fingers dug into his hand before she could stop herself. He didn't flinch. Breathe with me, he said quietly, his gaze locked on hers. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and reassuring, and for a moment the panic eased. The hospital loomed ahead, sterile lights and sharp scents replacing the cocoon of the car. Nurses rushed them into an exam room, voices overlapping. Lucas didn't leave her side, not once. He stood close enough that his presence filled the space, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on her face instead of the monitors. The doctor's voice was calm. It's stress-induced cramping. The baby's fine, but you need rest and minimal strain. Relief hit her so hard her eyes stung. She nodded, sinking back into the pillows. Lucas exhaled, long, quiet, and for a second, it looked like his walls dropped entirely. His hand brushed her hair back from her forehead. You scared me. She swallowed. I didn't think you could be scared. Neither did I, he said, voice low, almost to himself. When they finally returned to the penthouse, he didn't retreat to his office as usual. Instead, he stayed in the living room, flipping through work with the faintest frown. Close enough that if she needed anything, he could be there in seconds. And as Isla curled on the couch under a blanket, she realized the man who promised this would be just business was already breaking his own rules. Chapter 7. The afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows, painting gold across the penthouse floor. Isla sat curled on the sofa with a book open in her lap, though her eyes kept drifting to the skyline instead of the pages. She was still shaken from the hospital scare, but the quiet warmth of the room felt different today, less lonely, more watched over. The faint sound of footsteps made her glance up. Lucas stood at the edge of the living room, his usual tailored suit traded for a soft black sweater and slacks. The absence of his usual armor made him look startlingly human. You're not working? She asked, surprised. I moved my meetings online, he said simply. I didn't want to be too far if something happened. The admission made her heart skip. I'm fine, she said softly. His gaze dropped to the bump beneath her sweater. And the baby? Fine, too. She tried to smile. He nodded, but instead of returning to his office, he crossed the room and placed a small box on the coffee table. This is for you. Isla blinked. Why? Because you nearly scared me into a heart attack yesterday, he said with a dry edge, though there was something warm in his eyes. She hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside lay a delicate silver charm bracelet, each charm a tiny symbol, a book, a star, a little heart, a miniature cradle. She touched them carefully, the metal cool against her skin. They're beautiful, she murmured. What do they mean? I asked Marlene, he said, taking a seat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. The book, because you never stop reading. The star, because you're brighter than you think. The heart. His voice dipped slightly, like he wasn't sure he should finish. That's just because. Her throat tightened. And the cradle? That one's for our deal, he said, though the word deal felt wrong on his tongue now. Her fingers lingered on the charms, but her eyes stayed on him. Lucas, you didn't have to. I wanted to. He interrupted, his voice low. His hand shifted, almost brushing hers, then hesitating. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm. Isla's pulse thudded in her ears. She was aware of every inch of space between them, space that suddenly felt much too small. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. His mouth curved just slightly. And what did you expect? She hesitated, searching for the words. A man who could do this, without feeling anything. He didn't answer right away, but the way his eyes searched hers told her that maybe, just maybe, he couldn't. The shrill ring of his phone cut through the moment like a blade. His jaw tightened, but he rose, glancing at the screen. This might take a while, he said, his voice clipped again. But before he turned away, his hand brushed her shoulder, gentle, lingering, like he wasn't ready to break the moment entirely. Chapter 8. Lucas's voice was low and sharp as he spoke into the phone from across the room. Isla couldn't hear every word, but the tension in his tone was unmistakable. He paced near the window, his silhouette outlined against the fading city light. No. I said no, James. He snapped quietly, running a hand through his hair. We've been over this. If she gets involved, the press will. He stopped, listening, his jaw locking. Then I'll deal with it myself. He ended the call with a hard click, exhaling slowly before turning toward her. Everything okay? She asked carefully. His eyes held hers for a moment too long before he replied. It's complicated. She sat up straighter. Complicated how? He walked back toward her, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. There's a charity gala tomorrow night. I'm expected to attend. My usual +1 isn't available. Her brows knit. And James, my head of PR, thinks you should go with me. The idea hit her like a splash of cold water. Me? Why? To silence certain rumors before they start. He stood at the edge of the coffee table looking down at her. You're living here, someone will see. They'll make their own story if we don't give them one. Her pulse quickened. Lucas, I don't belong in your world. His gaze softened, just a fraction. You're carrying my child. That is my world now. The weight of his words pressed against her chest. She wanted to say no, to retreat back to the quiet corner she knew, but the thought of him facing the public alone while their secret grew between them felt wrong. Still, she hesitated. What if I embarrass you? His mouth curved faintly. You won't. Her eyes narrowed. How can you be so sure? Because, he said, leaning down slightly, I've seen you under pressure and you're extraordinary when you don't realize people are watching. Her heart skipped, caught between the warmth in his voice and the dangerous nearness of him. Before she could answer, he stepped back. You'll need a dress, something formal. I don't have anything like that, she murmured. I know. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. That's why I already booked an appointment. Tomorrow morning, my driver will take you. She stared at him, torn between annoyance at his high-handedness and the odd flutter in her stomach at the thought of him caring enough to arrange it. Lucas turned toward his office, but just before disappearing behind the door, he said over his shoulder, And Isla? Yes? Don't try to talk yourself out of it. This isn't just about me anymore. The door closed, leaving her with the bracelet still warm on her wrist and the realization that tomorrow she would be stepping straight into Lucas's world, and there would be no hiding. Chapter 9. The boutique was unlike anything Isla had ever stepped into. Soft music floated through the air, mingling with the faint scent of roses and expensive fabric. Velvet chairs lined the fitting area, and gold-framed mirrors caught every slant of light, turning the place into a palace of reflection. A smiling assistant named Claire ushered her toward a private dressing room. Mr. Gray sent over a list of styles, she said warmly, handing Isla a silk robe. Try these first. Isla ran her fingers over the gowns, silk, satin, chiffon, each one glittering or glowing under the lights. The price tags made her stomach tighten. She slipped into the first dress, a deep midnight blue that hugged her curves more closely than she was used to. When she stepped out, Claire clapped softly. Beautiful. Let's see the others. They cycled through gowns, emerald green, champagne gold, a soft blush pink. Each one made her feel like a stranger in her own skin, but also, maybe, like someone she could become. Claire handed her the final dress, a simple yet stunning black gown with a low back and a delicate sweep of fabric at the shoulders. Isla slid into it and felt different, stronger. She stepped out and froze. Lucas was sitting in one of the velvet chairs, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of water in hand. His suit jacket hung open, his tie loosened. He was watching her as if he had been there the entire time, his gaze slow and unflinching. "Lucas," she breathed, startled. "What are you?" "I wanted to see for myself," he said simply. "Turn around." Heat rushed to her face, but she obeyed, the gown whispering against her skin as she spun slowly. His eyes swept over her, not hungrily, but with an intensity that made her pulse race. "That's the one," he said, his voice low. She shook her head. "It's too much. I'll look ridiculous next to you." He stood, closing the space between them with quiet, deliberate steps. "You'll look perfect next to me." Her breath caught. The boutique seemed to shrink around them, every sound fading except the steady thump of her heart. He reached up, not to touch her, but to fix a small strand of hair that had fallen over her shoulder. His fingers hovered for a second too long before brushing it back. "You clean up well, Isla," he murmured, his lips curving faintly. She swallowed hard, unsure whether to step back or forward. "And you're very sure of yourself, Mr. Gray?" His smile deepened. "Only when I'm right." Before she could answer, Claire returned with the tailor, breaking the tension like glass shattering. Lucas stepped back, his hands in his pockets, but his eyes lingered on her until she looked away. And as the tailor fussed over hems and pins, Isla realized something dangerous. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, but her heart was already breaking the rules. Chapter 10. The gala glittered like a world carved out of champagne and diamonds. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light over the ballroom, and the soft hum of conversation mingled with the rich strains of a live orchestra. Waiters in white gloves glided between tables, balancing silver trays of champagne flutes that caught the light like tiny suns. Isla's hand rested lightly on Lucas's arm as they stepped inside. She had expected to feel like a fish out of water, but instead, every inch of her was humming, part nerves, part adrenaline, part something else entirely. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Is that Lucas Gray?" someone whispered. "And who's with him?" another replied. Lucas leaned down slightly, his warm breath brushing her ear. "Ignore them." "Hard to," she murmured, eyes flicking toward a cluster of women in jeweled gowns who were openly appraising her. His arm tightened fractionally. "They don't matter." A photographer appeared, camera raised. Lucas slowed, pivoted slightly toward Isla, and just like that, his hand slid around her waist, pulling her subtly but firmly closer. The flash went off, catching the exact moment her eyes darted up to meet his. She tried to steady her breathing. "Is this part of the deal?" He looked at her as if the rest of the room had disappeared. Tonight, it is. The evening unfolded in a blur of introductions. Senators, CEOs, foreign dignitaries. Lucas's grip on her hand never faltered, his presence like an anchor in the swirl of opulence and politics. But every time his fingers brushed hers, a small spark ignited low in her stomach. Near the center of the ballroom, the orchestra shifted to a softer, more intimate melody. Couples began drifting toward the dance floor. Lucas turned to her. "Dance with me." Her eyes widened. "I don't—" "You'll do fine," he said, already leading her forward. The moment his hand found the small of her back, her pulse tripped. They began to move, slowly, gracefully, and she realized he was guiding her with effortless precision, every step flowing into the next. "This is dangerous," she whispered without meaning to. He tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I might start forgetting this is fake." His gaze locked onto hers, his jaw tightening, as if she'd struck something deep. "Isla." But before he could finish, a voice interrupted. A tall, silver-haired man had approached, smiling with a politeness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lucas Gray," the man said smoothly. "I've been waiting for a chance to meet you, and this must be—" His gaze flicked to Isla, lingering a moment too long. "The reason the papers are buzzing." Lucas's arm stiffened against her. "Careful," he said quietly, though his smile remained. The man chuckled, unbothered. "Oh, I'm sure we'll talk later." As he walked away, Isla noticed Lucas's hand had tightened on hers, his steps sharper. The warmth between them was suddenly tangled with something else. Protectiveness. Possession. And it left her wondering what line they had just crossed. Chapter 11. Lucas didn't stop moving until they were out of the ballroom and into a quiet hallway lined with marble columns and gilded sconces. The music faded behind them, replaced by the soft hum of the city beyond the tall windows. Isla's heels clicked on the polished floor as she tried to match his long strides. "Lucas, what was that about?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept walking until they reached an alcove half hidden by heavy velvet drapes. He turned, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the corridor. "That man," Lucas said finally, his voice low and edged. "He has a history of trying to leverage people. If he thinks you're just part of a deal, he'll test the boundaries." Her brows drew together. "I'm not afraid of him." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his eyes scanning hers. "But that doesn't mean I'll let him near you." The space between them was small, smaller now that he was leaning in, his presence filling every inch. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, mingling with the warmth of his breath. "Lucas." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the pulse that had begun to beat harder in her chest. "I can't stand the thought of someone looking at you like that," he said, almost under his breath. "Not when you're—" He stopped himself, jaw flexing. Her lips parted. "Not when I'm what?" His gaze dropped just for a heartbeat to her mouth. "Not when you're mine, even if it's only supposed to be for now." The words stole the air from her lungs. He wasn't touching her, not yet, but the nearness was enough to make the edges of her thoughts blur. "This isn't part of the deal," she whispered. "No," he agreed. His hand lifted, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The simple touch was enough to make her knees weaken. "It's not." For a moment, the world outside the alcove didn't exist. Just the slow burn of his stare, the way the city lights cast a faint halo around his shoulders, and the silent question hanging between them. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Then, footsteps, loud, fast, coming down the hall. Lucas's head snapped toward the sound, and in a fluid motion, he stepped in front of her, his body shielding hers completely. A voice called his name, sharp and insistent, and the spell shattered. He glanced back at her, eyes still dark with something unspoken. "We're not done," he said quietly, then took her hand and led her back toward the noise and light of the ballroom. But Isla knew, whatever had just happened in that alcove wasn't something they could pretend away anymore. Chapter 12. The ballroom seemed brighter when they stepped back in, almost blinding after the quiet shadows of the alcove. Music swelled again, couples twirled under chandeliers, and the scent of champagne and roses hung heavy in the air. But Isla barely saw any of it. Her pulse was still tangled in the moment they had left behind, in the warmth of Lucas's words and the way his hand still wrapped around hers. People noticed. Heads turned. Whispers spread like ripples in water. The billionaire who rarely brought company had just returned with a woman whose cheeks glowed and whose hand he hadn't let go. Then the voice came again. Deep, amused, carrying too far. Lucas Kane, finally introducing us to your mystery? It was Jonathan Vance, the same man who had cornered her earlier, now holding a crystal glass and a sly smile. He stepped forward, eyes skimming over Isla like she was merchandise in a shop window. She's stunning, he said, gaze lingering. Tell me, how much is she part of the package? The room stilled. Isla felt her stomach drop, her breath catch. But before she could speak, Lucas's arm slid firmly around her waist. The move pulled her closer, so close she could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her side. She's not part of any package, Lucas said, voice deep enough to cut through the murmurs. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared. She's here with me, and that's all you need to know. Jonathan's smirk faltered, but he lifted a brow. Since when do you mix business and pleasure? Lucas's eyes didn't leave his. Since I met someone worth breaking the rules for. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Soft, sharp, curious. Isla's breath caught again, but this time for a different reason. The words hung there, and for a moment, she wondered if she'd imagined them. But the way his grip tightened, the way his thumb brushed over her hip in a subtle, almost protective stroke. It was real. Jonathan chuckled, masking his unease. Well. Looks like the great Lucas Kane has found his exception. He stepped back, tipping his glass before melting into the crowd. But the room hadn't lost its attention. They were being watched, measured, judged. And Lucas didn't care. Without another word, he guided her toward the exit, his pace unhurried but full of purpose. Her heart was racing so hard she could barely hear over it. When the doors closed behind them and the cool night air rushed in, she finally whispered, "Why did you say that?" Lucas looked down at her, city lights reflecting in his eyes. Because it's true. Before she could speak again, a black car pulled up to the curb. Unplanned, too fast. A tinted window lowered, and a familiar, dangerous face looked out. The last person she expected to see. The man who could ruin everything. Chapter 13. The car door opened slowly, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Isla's spine stiffened, a prickle running down her arms. Lucas's body angled in front of hers without thought, his frame a solid wall between her and whoever had just arrived. The man stepped out smooth and deliberate, tall, expensive suit, dark hair slicked back. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, but his smile, thin and knowing, made her skin crawl. "Lucas," he said, voice low and casual, like they were old friends. "It's been a long time." Lucas's tone was ice. "Not long enough, Adrian." Adrian's gaze slid past Lucas to Isla. It wasn't a glance, it was an assessment, slow and invasive, like he was cataloging everything about her. "So this is her," he murmured. Her stomach twisted. "Her?" she echoed, voice tighter than she meant. Lucas didn't answer. His hand pressed gently at her back, urging her toward the car waiting for them. "Get in, Isla." Adrian chuckled. "Always so protective. But I have to say, Lucas, you've made an interesting choice. A librarian, to carry the Kane heir. I didn't think you had that kind of sentimentality in you." The words hit her like cold water. Isla froze mid-step. He knew. Not just about her, but about the baby. Lucas's jaw flexed, the muscle ticking. "This conversation isn't happening here," he said flatly. "Oh, but it is," Adrian replied, taking a slow step forward. "Because if I'm right, and I usually am, that child changes everything. And I want to know how far you're willing to go to keep them both safe." The street felt too quiet. The city lights blurred around them, and Isla could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Lucas didn't move. For a moment, it was as if the air between the two men was a taut wire, ready to snap. Then he said, low enough that only Adrian could hear, "If you so much as breathe in her direction again, I'll end you." Adrian's smile only widened, but there was something sharp behind it now. "We'll see, cousin." Cousin? The word lodged in Isla's chest, unexpected and heavy. She looked from one man to the other, her mind racing. Lucas's hand found hers again, tight, almost desperate, and he guided her into their waiting car without another word. As the door closed and the city slipped away behind tinted glass, Isla turned to him, voice trembling. "Lucas, what did he mean? What's going on?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed out the window, his reflection hard and shadowed in the glass. Finally, he turned to her, eyes darker than she'd ever seen. "There's something I should have told you from the start." The car slowed, the driver's voice breaking in. "Sir, we're being followed." Chapter 14. The driver's words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Followed. Lucas's hand tightened over Isla's. "Drive faster," he ordered, his voice calm but laced with steel. The city blurred past the windows, lights streaking into gold and white ribbons. Isla's pulse thudded in her ears, matching the rhythm of the tires over the wet road. "Lucas," she began. He cut her off. "Don't panic." Too late for that. Her other hand rested protectively over her stomach, a small, instinctive gesture she didn't even realize she'd made until Lucas's eyes flicked down and softened for a split second. The rearview mirror caught the glint of headlights tailing them, steady and unyielding. The car stayed 3 lengths back, never too close, never too far. Her breath caught. Who are they? His jaw worked. Adrian doesn't just show up to talk. He's making a move. The car swerved onto a narrower street. Shadows clung to the walls like thick curtains and the tires hissed against the slick asphalt. She swallowed hard. "You said you should have told me something. Tell me now." Lucas hesitated, and she saw it, the rare crack in his armor. "Adrian isn't just my cousin. He's my father's other son." The words made the air feel thin. "Your half-brother?" "Yes, and he believes the Kane fortune should be his. He's been trying to dismantle me piece by piece for years." Lucas's voice dropped lower. "And now he's realized the fastest way to hurt me is through you. Through the baby." A surge of fear coiled in her stomach. "Lucas, if he's that dangerous—" The driver interrupted, tension snapping in his voice. "They're closing in." Lucas looked at her, his eyes intense, unblinking. "Isla, I need you to trust me. No matter what happens in the next few minutes, you stay with me. You don't run unless I tell you. Do you understand?" Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "I trust you." The word seemed to hit him somewhere deep. His hand brushed her cheek, quick, almost rough, like he couldn't help himself even now. "Good." The car took another sharp turn, but the headlights stayed locked on them. Then, up ahead, the street narrowed into an underpass. "Hold on," Lucas warned. The driver floored it, the engine roaring as they shot forward. For a heartbeat, the world was nothing but speed and the pounding in her chest. Then, light. They burst out of the underpass, tires skidding as the car spun to the side. Behind them, a black SUV screeched to a halt, blocked by a sudden barricade of 2 dark sedans that appeared from nowhere. Isla gasped. "What?" Lucas's hand found hers again, warm and steady. "They're mine," he said, nodding toward the sedans. "Security." But before relief could fully sink in, one of Lucas's men approached the window, leaning down with a grim expression. "Sir, Adrian got away." Chapter 15. The penthouse felt different that night. Quieter. Too quiet. Lucas had insisted on bringing Isla straight home after the chase. Security was doubled at the entrance, armed men stationed in the shadows, yet the stillness inside made her chest feel tight, as if the walls were listening. She paced the living room, arms wrapped around herself. He's still out there, Lucas. He could try again. Lucas stood by the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city skyline. His shoulders were rigid, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "He won't get near you." The conviction in his voice should have soothed her, but it didn't. "You can't promise that." He turned then, his eyes finding hers. "I can, because I will make sure of it. You and the baby." His voice broke for the smallest second, barely audible, but she caught it. "You're all that matters now." Her heart twisted. "Lucas." He crossed the room in slow, purposeful steps, stopping just inches from her. The heat radiating from his body wrapped around her like a blanket. "I went into this thinking I could separate business from emotion," he said, his voice low, his gaze unwavering. "I thought I could give you everything you needed to carry my child and then let you go." Her breath hitched. The air between them hummed with unspoken words. "I was wrong," he continued. "Somewhere between the doctor's appointments and the late-night tea in the kitchen, you became more than just the woman carrying my heir. You became the reason I want to come home at night." Isla's eyes stung. "Lucas," she wanted to speak, to tell him she had felt the same shift, but her voice failed. His hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing the soft curve of her cheek. "I don't just want the child anymore, Isla. I want you." Her pulse drummed in her ears. The warmth in his touch, the tenderness in his words. It was everything she had never expected to hear from him. But fear slipped in. "And when the danger's over, will you still want me then? Or will this—" She gestured between them. "Be another deal you walk away from?" His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something fiercer. "I will never walk away from you. Not now, not ever." A lump formed in her throat. For the first time she believed him, but before either of them could close the distance, a loud buzz from the intercom shattered the moment. Lucas's security chief's voice crackled through. "Sir, we've found Adrian's hideout." Lucas's gaze locked with hers, determination hardening every line of his face. "It's time to end this."
Thank you for listening till the end. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from.